Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is LawPod.
Okay, welcome to LawPod. My name is Alice Diver, and I'm a lecturer in the School of Law at Queen's University Belfast. I'm joined today by Professor Emily Hipchin of Brown University. I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Emily Hipshin. I direct the nonfiction writing program at Brown University, but I think more salient to this conversation, I'm the editor of Adoption and Culture, which is the journal of the Alliance for the Study of Adoption and Culture, which is how Alice and I got to meet each other through the
Yes.
journal and through this particular work. I'm also part of the executive committee, and I edit a book series for the Ohio State University Press. We publish scholarship on adoption and culture. So that's kind of who I am.
Yes, that's where we have adoption in common. We have an interest, obviously, in adoption, professional and personal, I guess. And yeah, we were going to talk about the latest edition of Adoption and Culture because I was lucky enough to be included in it. I have a piece included based on a recent paper. So we thought we would talk around the themes in that. Should I sum up what I'm raving about in the piece? Would that be a
Oh,
starting point?
please do it. I mean, it's a fascinating piece.
No, thank you.
It goes in so many different directions. It's got law, it's got Frankenstein, it's got I think Wuthering Heights is in there too, like
Oh
Heathcliff,
yes,
right? Yeah,
gotta have
Wuthering.
Heathcliff.
I mean, there's so many. One of the things to think about, or to maybe we can talk about at some point, is how often figures, adoptee figures and adoption itself just kind of shows up everywhere, and then people don't notice. And then as soon as you're kind of in the field, it becomes clear how common uh, uh, it is in all of our cultural productions to see adoptees, to see families formed in adoption or outside of biological kinning, um, and it becomes like everywhere. And so, in a sense, what Alice's paper, your paper is doing or did was to talk across all of these different iterations of that particular kinship paradigm. And it was fun to see it, and then fun to see it contextualized in all of the legal work that you do generally. Now, this isn't the first paper I think I've seen from you, right? A long time
Mhm.
ago, didn't we publish
Yeah.
something about the law? And when you were working very early in the discipline.
Yes, that is correct. Good while ago, I think it was 2011 maybe. So I suppose
Hmm.
about 10 years ago. And I think I did a paper 2010, again on a similar theme. The 2011 one, I think, looked at UN
Hmm.
jurisprudence, various country reports, more on origin deprivation. So looking not just adoption, but also at surrogacy, and anyone being deprived of ancestry and not having the right to find things out, to discover your genetic relatives. So that was my soapbox, my bugbear. But the irony is that, about 5 years ago, I did manage to track down birth family, not through law. Law still has the veto there and still would regard me as this creature. But yeah, DNA testing. I just happened to find an aunt by chance who was, seeking out her indigenous roots. I'm older than her, but she's my aunt. So it's all her fault, So it's nice to be writing from a perspective of being in reunion with half of the genetic family, the birth family. So that was good. Oh, but why literature? I still maintain if you want to bring about change on something like this, something emotional, law is not best equipped. People will listen to fiction. Movies like Philomena, as you say, and coming into Christmas, watch out, adoption will be everywhere. There's bound to be a "you're not my mother, yes I am" moment. Star Wars, I am your father. That we're going to be bombarded with it, but we're used to it now. It's
You
the
know that
thing.
it didn't ever occur to me. It's very strange, the sensitivities about these that are so variant. So you watch things and and it's only like the third time through, or like you're standing in the shower a week later that you realize that you've watched an adoption narrative, which is Elf. Do you know Elf?
I
It's
yes, it's watched. They watch it every year in our
mhm.
house. Now I can cope with it because Will Ferrell, if he's willing to wear those mustard tights, then I can forgive the way that they treat, the whole adoption thing at the start. He makes up for it when he jumps on the tree and stuff. So yeah, the kids have always watched it and loved it, and tried to jump on the tree when they were small. You know, like, "Well, can we do that?" No, no, you
No.
cannot. But they sort of get, and they always watch my response. The bit where he crawl, is at the orphanage. Well, number one, he's not an orphan, and he crawls into the little bag, and it's not maybe dealt with very sensitively, but I can forgive Will Farrell just purely because everything that follows,
The
um,
mustard
but
type. Yeah,
yeah,
but it is it's a pretty typical Christmas adoption narrative.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
it's all about gifting and, um, and the obscuration of parenting. I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty typical. It is a pretty typical example, but it again, I think I must have seen it 2 or 3 times because, of course, here every year, and like,
yeah,
Elf, Elf, Elf. After it was, produced, I just didn't even notice, and now I can't help but notice,
yeah.
it's got all of those sort of holiday tropes that you're gonna see all over
Mm.
the place again and again, as you say.
Yes, and the convenient resolution of sort of, father's horrified, mother is conveniently absent because it
Of
seems to be in a
course.
lot of the fictions, if somebody's passed away, that's them conveniently dealt with. So Elf doesn't have to go and find his genetic mother.
Mhm.
And again, I will also, because James Caan was Sonny Corleone. I can cope again with his responses. I quite like the little anger bits. So it's interesting, but yeah, it does fall into the various, especially the resolution thing of, "Oh, we're all fine now." But there is at least the flawed reunion, and there's some bumps in the road before it's sort of, you know, it works out. Well, wouldn't dare with a Christmas movie. You're not going to have people running, screaming on a permanent
No,
basis. That
the dead birth mother trope is, a long-standing one. I think, BJ Lifton talks about it a great deal, but I don't think she's the first one. So, I mean, it may all go all the way back to somebody like Jean Patton. I don't remember
Mm,
exactly, but that woman has to be out of the way somehow in order for there to be a kinning, a real kinning in the adoptive family. And I don't understand that at all, except it must be about the blood, yeah. I don't know. Anyhow.
yeah, it's just, I guess maybe it's the orphan myth of, you are an orphan, even if you're not. That's the bit that bothers me. It's, I think, I was orphanized. I'll give you that, but I don't think at any stage I was an orphan. An orphan. We all had the living, or generally had living relatives, kinfolk, siblings, half siblings, whatever's there. So
I
that
spent the
sticks in
first
the
3
craw.
months of my life in an orphanage, but I had at that point, I had, I don't know, uncountable relatives, like lots and lots of blood relatives, but I was in an orphanage because I had been abandoned there, and somehow that, all that paperwork made me an orphan when nobody was dead. So,
That
yeah.
sticks in the craw. But it's same. Sort of 8 months for, and when my
Mhm.
experience. So you do wonder what was happening. And when you've got things like Buddy the Elf, it's very glossed over everywhere. It's just sort of, but you're here now, you're fine. It's very sort of, it's handier for people to sort of deal with that. As I've referred to myself as a rescue dog to someone a few months back, and they were like, "You can't say that." And I thought, "Yes, I can, and I will bite you if you annoy me." So yeah, yeah, that's an interesting one. So, but the piece, I think we mentioned Frankenstein
Mhm.
and the monsters. So I was sort of in my cheery way, comparing some of the characters, to monsters, to talk about the monstrous outcomes, the monstrous things that law can do. So we had, obviously, Frankenstein's creature has to be in there because he's got uh, all the heartwarming themes. He's got the abandonment, the rejection, the fruitless search, and a bit of self harm along the way. And then with Never Let Me Go, the clones on their search. Obviously, they don't get reunion, and the information they get is heartbreaking and disappointing. Um, that they're told we let you do art to even work out if you maybe had souls. So the whole dehumanizing, you're abhuman, you're not worthy, etc. That's hammered home, like, it's sort of at the end. And then Heathcliff, who I know normally we wouldn't get included. I think why not? Because the society has helped to make him the monster, and he has got this unknown ancestry that's never discovered. Unlike a lot of the heroic, tales where someone has reunion at the end, he never, we just never know, and we have to sort of go on with that. So, and I guess the point was that if you are dehumanized like that from a lawyer perspective, then human rights are not really going to apply to you. So you can't demand your original certificate. I know it's a bit of a stretch, but if you're going to discriminate against someone or justify cruelties, the best way to do it is to take away the human rights aspect. And what better way than to say, "Oh, you're a bit of a monster." I know it's a very basic way of drilling it down, but
No, it's actually pretty it's pretty interesting. Um, so in my case, I don't have my original birth certificate, and I don't think at this point I can petition for it. I've been in reunion for, oh my God, it's since 1999. So however many years that is, a long time. Um, and I think just last year, so over here, all of that is governed by the state. So it's not a federal program. There's no federal law that governs the release of original birth certificates. It's all state by state. And so I was born in New York State. And so New York laws govern the release of my birth certificate. And they did not allow this until last year, but you still have to petition, I think, a registry in order to get it done. I'm not exactly sure. Somebody I know who was born in White Plains, which is a different city. I was born in Buffalo, which is over on the west side of the state. This person was born closer to New York City, petitioned for his birth certificate and got it. But of course, the problem, even with the two things. The problem even with getting that original birth certificate is that the names on it were often falsified. So that the information, even on the original, that is the legal birth certificate for the child that was born that becomes me or this other person, those names were not legitimate. They were fake. So he's at a dead end. He can't find the people who were his blood parents. Now on mine would have had, I've not seen it, would have had the false name that my mother gave when she was in the home. And I don't know whether she would have given, I think she didn't give a name of the father. I think that's one of the ways that they leveraged the children out of their mother's hands in the era that I was adopted in, was that if you didn't have a name of the father on the birth certificate, you were particularly vulnerable to legal machinations that meant that you could relinquish the child easier. You did relinquish the child more easily. And I was adopted through Catholic Charities from a Catholic orphanage, a very famous one. The funny story about that is this is a new job for me. So I started this job in January of 2020, and we immediately sort of went into lockdown shortly after that. But the thing is that my boss, it turns out, is from Buffalo. So when I told him that I was born there, he's like, "Oh, wow, that's really crazy." And then I told him I was adopted, and then I told him the institution that had housed me where I was born and then had housed me. And he paused for a really long time, and he told me that his father used to threaten him with leaving him at this place if he was a bad boy. And I mean, he was like tearing up. He's like, "I cannot believe that you lived in that horrible place." I was like, "It was 3 months. I thank you." What do you say when people say, "My God, it was horrible"? Well, yeah, it was. Um, and it still is for lots of people. And we're going back there, I'm afraid, in sort of quick order because of what's happening in the Supreme Court here.
yes, that's quite terrifying. And then the conflation of the arguments as well. It bothers me when people immediately jump into the abortion argument when you're talking adoption, and you think, sorry, how did we make that leap? Separate issues, and I'd be grateful because I say, 1960s, obviously we predate, you know, the legislation, so it makes it sort of tricky. But yeah, people when they just make that immediate jump, you know that the next thing they're possibly going to say is to talk gratitude. But aren't you grateful? You should be so grateful. And I'm thinking, but I am on one level, but not so grateful that I wouldn't like to have my original birth certificate, please. I
Yeah,
would like to, you know.
I'd like to be a human being like other human beings who have their original birth certificate. My birth certificate, like my parents gave me my birth certificate, I guess when I was 18, so I could see it, but it's the amended one. So it doesn't, it's a piece of green paper that says what my name is, says what my birth date is, says I think it might say who my parents are, and then it has like a impress seal, like a pressed seal in it, but it has
Right.
no other information on it. Oh, it does say what city I was born in, but that's it.
Makes me think of a little title deed if it's got the little sort of a impressed seal on it,
Yeah,
well, or a receipt, you know. I've
more like
threatened to
a receipt, although I do have the receipt for me too. I know
oh,
what my parents paid for me.
oh my God, you've loads of information.
Yeah. This
Wow.
happened after my father died. My mother was always, much more open to, the truth of the family, I guess, than my father wanted to pretend that things were not that way, but, so after my father died, I got a lot of that paperwork, which I still have. So, but yes, I have the note from some monsignor to my dad acknowledging that he had spent X number of dollars,
Oh,
um,
wow.
to process the adoption or, I think it was as a donation, which is,
Oh,
clearly
yes. Oh, yes,
not what.
because it can't be, human trafficking. It has to be that you've made this lovely donation to the church. So yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's really interesting to think about the inhumanity of, well, first of all, we can start with Heathcliff because at least he comes to Wuthering Heights as a whole person, which, not Frankenstein. And
Yeah,
I
he's
think
cuter for a start.
super cuter, so much cuter. Yeah, so, but did you read this when you were like an adolescent and just love
Oh
Heathcliff
God,
and
yes,
forget
and you
about
have
the
that
murder?
different yeah, the teenage girl thing of, he's the ideal date. But as you say, that you get a little older and you think, maybe not. Maybe not so
Yeah,
much."
yeah, once you get to college and you encounter this book, you realize, I mean, I don't know how I read over the hanging puppy. How did I read over the hanging puppies and think that this was a great guy? Like, that would never happen again. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting, the different responses to, Heathcliff, period, and all of the ways in which, um, I don't know, I've taught this book now maybe 8 or 10 times, a pretty good number of times, to students who are 18, 19 years old, many of them female, although that obviously doesn't control anything, but, their response to him is to is is to treat him as if he's sort of this really wonderful stranger come to town to shake everything up. Like it becomes a really American narrative in that way in my students' hands. And so he's the kind of monster that's perfectly okay because Wuthering Heights might as well be X town in Kansas or Colorado in the 19th century. And so they treat him like a gunslinger almost. Like he's there to upset everything, and they love it. It's the anarchy in them.
Yes.
But then, I mean, if you're looking at something like, I mean, the next step in the progression of dehumanizing, although Heathcliff is plenty dehumanized, and of course he has to die in the end too. All the adoptees always have to die.
Absolutely. Yes.
Um, yeah, Yeah, either that or be so subsumed in the adoptive family that you can forget that they're adopted. I
Yeah.
think, I'm trying to think of where this happens, but it's yeah. Anyway, but with, the, Ishiguro novel,
Mm.
the there's this tension between whether the children are pieces of things or are themselves. So, they're literally thought of as parts, like they're like,
Mhm.
um what are these lots where you take your discarded car and then they're sort of predated for
Oh, yeah.
the parts that can be used for, other cars. And so, but then they demonstrate, or they're asked to demonstrate, or somehow Ishiguro's brilliance is that he can demonstrate that parts are not whole. Like there's something anti-gestalt about personhood or humanity that once you can take it to parts or dissect it or perceive of it as party, it ceases to be human. Which is kind of interesting to think about because then when you shift over to Frankenstein, he's fundamentally a chimera. I mean, he's built of all kinds of parts and who knows what parts. At least in Shelley's novel, there's like 2 sentences. He comes from slaughterhouses and dissection tables. And so one presumes that he might have a thigh bone from a horse or a cow tooth or something. So he's fundamentally a chimera. He's outside um, per- perfect humanity or pure humanity. And his partsiness then makes him even more monstrous and less personally. I read this essay where the article was, or the author was arguing that Frankenstein isn't human, can't be human, not because of his chimeral um, essence, but because he had no family. Like he doesn't have a family at all. And my feeling is that he's just over familyed. Like he has so much family. Every part of him had a family that that it's really the other problem that he has so much family. Like I mean, all the way, he might have like a stud. He might have actually, if he comes from a horse at all, like he might have a stud role or a dog, like he might have a pedigree in addition to all of, but yeah. But this person was arguing that from the anti-gestalt position, or maybe the pro-gestalt position, I'm not quite sure, but that the pieces all come together into something whole that does not have a family. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And then he gets the rejection from his, I'm reluctant to say father, but from his creator,
Yeah.
who's just horrified that he's brought this creature into being and then spends the rest of, rest of existence running away and fleeing. And then he does the classic thing of wandering, looking through windows, has to teach himself language, has to learn the social skills himself. I like Frankie's monster. Some bits resonated, the endless quest and the people recoiling and running away. I probably just have that effect on my students as well at times. But it's a thing. It's a thing. The clones get it too with the people looking after them are scared to touch them. They recoil um, as well, and answers are not forthcoming. Reunions are, they're flawed. But it's all but the law just well, Frankenstein's beyond the law altogether. But with the clones, the law has worked to make this all legal for the greater good because people need kidneys and lungs, etc., etc. Could be very cruel and say people continue to commission babies as infertility cures or whatever. But that if I'll be, somebody will yell at me for saying that. But I think the parallels I think are there to
I
an
think
extent.
like every good dystopian novel, like The Handmaid's Tale, Ishiguro is taking a thing that exists and just extending it slightly into its implication.
Yeah.
So for instance, I mean, you're exactly right. You can if we can think of personhood as a used car lot or people or bodies as used car lots or whatever these are. I wish I could it's too early in the morning for me to think of the right word for these. But where you go and you get a used part because you need a used transmission and that's cheaper than a new one. Um, if we can think of people as repositories for things that we can use, it's the end of the utilitarian argument. It's the end of the people as useful or labor units or having civic purpose. It's that logical end. If you can do that, it's the logical end of organ donorship, honestly. I
Yeah.
was I was reading an interesting gosh, what is that book? I think it was a book, but it might have been a part of a book about because here we have again, if you're thinking about adoption and abortion, there are lots of states who've introduced what's called a heartbeat bill,
Yeah.
and that restricts abortion to um, before the fetus has a heartbeat. And I kept thinking about organ donation in that context, in that legal context. And again, I have no law, but in essence, in order to harvest organs from a person who has said that they wish to be an organ donor, you have to keep the heart beating all the way to the end, to the harvest of the heart itself. Otherwise, the organs are not usable. And so, to a certain extent, heartbeat bills seem to violate an understanding of life that is conveniently different for organ donation than it is for fetuses. And of course, the argument is, well, a fetus is potentially going to live, and an organ donor is not potentially going to live. But I think it intersects um, certainly intellectualized, or at least thinking conceptualized ideas of what life is or how we know one is alive, and legal ones. Like the idea of what it means to be legally dead or legally alive is contextual and historical, like clearly, and inconsistent across different civic uses for the body.
Yeah. And I suppose it touches on the definition of what constitutes a human,
Mhm. who
who is eligible to have rights, who is eligible to avoid being discriminated against. Yeah, I wonder what it says about us as a society. It's interesting, and that we have to veto things and hide things and fabricate certain, legal fictions to justify or enable, various outcomes. Um, I was trying to find my certificate of mental hygiene that I mentioned the last day. I have yet to find it. It does exist because, I probably should get it laminated and bring it to class someday. But I had to have that, before I was able to be classed as adoptable. I had to have that. So I don't know exactly what that related to, but I'm quite proud of it. It's, the proudest certificate I have. I just like it because it's, yeah, human, you know, viable person here. She's sort of good to go. Um, so yeah, that I had planned to find it for today, but it's obviously it will show up. It will turn up.
Do you think that comes out of the eugenics stuff, Alice? I think it does.
Possibly. I think so. I think people, yeah, as you say, it's like the receipt or the title deeds, but back in the day, certainly. I mean, I was kind of not marketed as, but sent to a very fair-skinned, blue-eyed couple because at that stage I still was quite blonde and blue-eyed, and there was, a bit of Irish ancestry going on as well because they were very into the matching, as we know, matching by
Mhm.
physical characteristics. Whether that was a kindness of you will fit well, we're mammals and we are more likely to trust people who look like us, being slightly sort of facetious, or whether it was the secrecy thing because our generation, there was still some doubt over should you be told, like, then that was replaced by tell children as soon as possible. Going back to Buddy the Elf, we had to wait till he was 6'3". But yeah, but I mean, I know people my age who didn't find out till much later in life, or indeed, maybe after their parents had died, they discover they're adopted, and that does mess with the head a bit. So at least there's some progress made over the last century of, policy behaviors, I guess.
Yeah, in the US, it was like that, in the same period that I have a so what's really interesting is that in my documents that I have, um, they show so an initial sort of height, weight, not height, length, I guess, weight, and, all the rest of that business, but then the second bit is, impossible because children so so we know that the initial report on my physical statistics was probably falsified. And then after that, like the third or fourth one, um, is all of the like she follows eyes, she follows faces, she like can grasp things. They're basically testing again, that I'm a normal human being and therefore a good product to be sent to out into, this family that is expecting a child that's like them. And my
Yeah.
parents, congratulated themselves that they told us that we were adopted from before I can remember, but they never told anybody else. Like,
Yeah.
it was always us, and it was never to be discussed because they wanted nobody to know that
Same.
because, of course, their yeah, it was about their infertility, so I think that's
It's a
different now.
thing.
I think that's very different now, at least in the US among, um, matched or at least, domestic in race adoptions. I think that's different. I
Yeah.
think people don't pretend anymore.
Yeah. No, it's similar here too. And obviously, Northern Ireland's quite good because you can get your birth certificate at 18.
Mm.
Depending on your date of birth, you might have to have some counseling first. So there is a bit more openness there. Um, Obviously, though, I mean, donor anonymity could be repeating the same mistakes if parents opt not to tell of genetic origin. So there's still some of the stigma and the various veils of secrecy that that have
Right,
maybe
and I'm
carried over. You know,
23andMe and Ancestry.com are undoing all I mean, you're evidence of this. They're undoing all of that. Like, if you want donor secrecy, you can't do DNA testing in this way. You can't have
yeah,
that open in the way you have it open. It explodes all of the secret.
yeah,
And, so I think that those people who believed that they were securely um, getting gametes that nobody would know and that they would be just,
mm,
yeah, they would be people unto and from themselves only are in for a shock because I don't think
that's
we have that. I don't think we have that anymore. I mean, and then
yeah,
to a certain degree, it's a detriment, isn't it? Um, it's a detriment in the sense that there is this. I think there's a and people like Kimberly Layton talk about this pretty frequently, and Sally Haslinger, and a lot of people talk about this actually, that there's something about personhood and agency and personhood and the predominance of the biological story as controlling agency and personhood not helpful, if that makes any sense at all. And this is in Carol Singley's book too, Adopting America, that that if you that we have myths of personhood that require um, us to believe that we create who we are, and that being unkind allows that, even if it's even if it's only fictive. So, for instance, you can think of Frankenstein, this is even Heathcliff, as self-made. The personhood is self-made. The body doesn't get self-made, obviously, but somehow that's disconnected, or at least the books are asking about the connection between humanity and personhood and the body of the person himself, herself, itself. Is
mhm.
that am I making any sense?
Well, yes, because I think it ties into I suppose, one of the debates actually that's going on in this part of the world at the moment about the notion of what's reductiveness? Is that maybe the right term? I mean, the term birth mother in the Irish legislation is I know the term itself is contentious, although I sometimes still use it if you're trying. It's handy if you're trying to distinguish.
Mhm.
But I can see why mothers might see it as reductive, that it's not just about that one act. Um, Having given birth a few times, I would say it's quite a significant act. And actually, if I'm classed as birth offspring or birth child or something, to play devil's advocate, I can see it as why is that one word not? Maybe it's too emotional or too a painful reminder. But they haven't yet come up with a term, as far as I'm aware, to replace it in the legislation. So there's talk of maybe original mother or first mother. I think genetic mother, because if you're thinking I like the term birth family. I know in some of the Hague cases, they talk of the birth country to see, where should a child be returned or not if they've been abducted. So I don't know. The old term natural mothers, I always got a kick out of that. Natural mother. Okay, so we're unnatural or, and I suppose artificial reproduction, no one says that anymore because it's like so I remember someone asking me once, were you grown in a lab? And I said, maybe. I do not know. I cannot answer that, sir. Good day. So there is that sort of the element of, where to go. But I know, but names matter. I guess names if you don't have one, if you don't have your original, I mean, Frankenstein doesn't have it. He's just the monster, the creature. Always thought that could they not have called him Bob or Bert or just he might have been in less of a mood if he'd had some kind of name, you know. Yeah, it's a strange one, but I guess it matters, with it,
Well, I mean,
naming stuff.
oh yeah. No, Lorraine Dusky runs the First Mother Forum, I believe it is. And they've been fighting. They've been struggling with what to call themselves and how to think of themselves. And of course, there's Concerned United Birth Mothers Cub, which is the original sort of birth mother rights group.
Yeah.
Um, and as an editor, I can tell you that this is a struggle. And I tend to like I had a complaint for I guess the last issue before this one, from someone who was like, "Why are we not making a single word out of birth mother anymore?" Because for a long time I was, and then I had a conversation with a group of people who were like, it's a mother, and there should be a space with birth because then they can claim mother as separate from the birth part." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense to me." But and I'm also hearing Alice gestational mother.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
we could live with
um,
for surrogacy, I suppose.
gestational mother, but natural and
Absolutely.
real are, in the
Yes. I
way
don't I
past.
have mixed feelings about that one, you know. I quite like mothers of loss, but then I could see how perhaps maybe adoptive parents might take issues with that or but that one I could live with. But maybe it's too emotive. I really am curious to see what
I
term
know,
will
I'm really
be.
interested in what they're gonna
It's a
come
tough
up
one.
with.
It really
Yeah,
is a tough
and
one.
as to names, do you know what your did your, family name you before they relinquished you?
They did. My well, nobody knew. I will call her birth mother, but sometimes I call her the mothership. Sometimes she seems to like she likes that one. She did. I mean, she called me Karen Marie, which is very different to then my folks. Then my folks nearly called me Gladys. And then they opted for Alice. I mean, Alice was bad enough in
I'll
the 70s. Gladys, I think, actually could be quite cool now. But yeah, so that would have
get
been
better
that would
though.
have been people get a kick out of that. But yeah, she'd call me Karen Ray. Obviously, no surname. But yeah, I've since sort of tracked them down, my indigenous Newfoundland connection. And there were 12 in the family. I managed to meet maternal grandmother, birth grandmother, whatever I can call her. Met her shortly in the reunion. She's since passed away. So that was amazing. And she said, I bet you never thought you'd be sitting here talking to me. And I just thought no awkwardness, that she just summed it up amazingly, and I came home with jars of moose meat. My uncles offered to take me out, the next time I come over, they'll take me out shooting, which, I'm from Northern Ireland. I can't, that just scares, we have the fear, but I certainly would like to go, walked out, saw the scenery. It was just really good. It was nice. It was a
Wasn't
good
it
thing.
weird to see people's versions of your face? Is there a strong resemblance in your family of
Yes.
origin?
Yes, that's what everyone apparently we have the same mannerisms. We have the same feet because photographs were taken, and one of my daughters, we're all husband said it's like when we're walking together, he said, it's like watching the Weest Woman competition, which is not a real thing because we're all so small. Because I'm 5 foot, she's 4'11". Daughter's 5 foot. We're quite. Husband's tall. Everyone else is tall, but and among the aunts and uncles, some are tall and short. But just with me and, the mother, the daughter, he said, Did you ever see a row of such small women all together? The weest woman competition. But he was a bit freaked out because he said, in all the years I've known you, you've never had anyone that looked like you because, well, the children, I think, look more like him. So when the cousins were gathered, he said, everyone in this, he says, most people in this room have the same eyes as you. He had to go sit down for a while, and he has lots of cousins, so he's used to that. But it was weird for him that I had people. I liked it. It was great. I thought it was, they were lovely. I have to say that they very welcoming and very lovely people. I struck lucky, it was good. They've been yeah, they've been kind. Oh.
So one of the things, Alice, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about because I don't know very much other than what I've read, is the situation with mother and baby homes
Mm,
over in Ireland that's been developing over the last couple of years. And
mhm,
I'd love a catch up on where that is in terms of the law and also in terms of just what the I think of it as blowback from that might be because we've got
yes.
another situation here, which is boarding schools. So the boarding school movement in the US and Canada was to move Indigenous children out of Indigenous families into institutions that would re-educate them and whiten them, essentially, civilize them. But what's happening is that people are digging up the grounds around these boarding schools and discovering that hundreds, literally hundreds of unmarked graves of these
Mhm,
children. And it started, I believe, in Canada, but they're now doing this all over the place. Well, all over the place, wherever there were boarding schools, to discover what the death rate was and who those children were, and to return the bodies to their tribal families, really. And then
mhm,
there's been some legislative. I think it's mostly devolved to the states again. Um, action on this, but it was in the news for a really long time. It's kind of fallen out of the news because of Omicron, but I wonder what's happening over there
yes.
because we followed you.
Right. Yeah, there's so much there's a lot of interest because I'm in contact with through other adoption networks, people in South Korea, adoptees in South Korea. They're quite fascinated by this. So yeah, the world does seem to be watching. I mean, the report is largely at the risk of being controversial, largely discredited. And the courts found that they really disregarded testimony. I know, as far as I'm aware, testimony's been destroyed as well. The mothers, many were quite annoyed, angry, and hurt by it. I mean, the first page of the executive summary, if memory serves, and this is one for Northern Ireland's having its separate report going on, so I'm on about the one in Republic of Ireland. There was a
Mhm.
paragraph on the first page that struck me, and it said, really, the homes, the church, they took these women in when their families had cast them out. Now, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but I had to throw the thing across the room and go and, you know, lie down for a while. When I read that, I thought, well, there's victim blaming, and if families were if families were casting people out, I wonder why that was. Would the church maybe have had anything, the church and the state have anything to do with that, with stigma, and shame and everything else and the secrecy. So yeah, I think there's going to have to be another one. There's going to have to be a revisiting, getting, testimony. It's one thing to be listened to, another to be really, really heard. And I mean, there's so many women, I would imagine, don't trust the system, don't want to talk, are opposed to having their secrets coming out because they're of an age. There's the shame. How do you get over the personal shame? And law, church, society complicit in that, in the shaming of people, the dehumanizing of them. Uh, Again, fiction sometimes is better placed to bring about change. The movie Philomena, it's not perfect, and of course, adoptee he's conveniently deceased, so she can leave the graveyard kind of upbeat. That scene, jars with me. But I remember my mother-in-law, when she saw the film, she said, "Oh," and when she'd known my story a long time. When she saw the movie, she said, "Oh, now I get why you're annoyed." Uh, yeah, yes. But it took that for her to sort of say, "I see now why you write angry things." Yes, yes, I am sort of justifiable anger. Um, so yeah, it got anything that gets people talking. Law, they don't necessarily people. I don't know why they tend maybe not to warm to legal debate, But if something's written nicely or gets the attention or taps the emotions, then yeah. So we await the truth. At least we've moved on from denial. There was quite a bit of denial, as in, oh, these numbers are exaggerated. There aren't that many babies buried. But yeah, it's coming out, and the bit about vaccine trials, maybe on the unbaptized baby, the illegitimate, horrible terms, illegitimate baby. Did they even have souls? I'm being slightly dramatic, but when you read things and hear various testimonies, this is maybe what was said. It's just Handmaid's Tale. People think it's fiction. No, no, nothing fictional there. It's just being presented to a modern, an audience to say, hey, this stuff happens. You put a red dress on it, people will pay attention, but there's nothing sci-fi about it. uh, You know,
No, it's a good dystopian novel. It tells you where the current practices may lead. I mean, that's
yeah.
kind of its job. And dystopian novels are good for that. Dystopian movies are good for that. So that you don't have to bear the burden of probability yourself. Like, you can see somebody working on you have this sort of skewy feeling about something, and then its you see somebody working on its logical end, and then that feeling becomes solidified for you. Like, that's now I know why that's wrong because it could go here. Or now I know why I should think more about this because we could end up
Hmm.
in this particular world. And as long as the world is portrayed as the place you don't want to be, then that fiction will work to to at least alert people that there's something going on. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, again, I've taught Frankenstein too a thousand times. Not a thousand. That's hyperbole, obviously. But a number of times, and my students all come to it having had it at some other place and decided that it is a warning against scientific discovery, and that's where they all start. Like, we should not, even if we can do something, we should not do that. And so then they start talking about cloning human beings, which, is where Ishiguro takes it. But they start talking about, this is my dog. They
I see
start
Darby.
talking
That
about
is lovely. Hello.
they start
Sorry.
talking about that's all right, about
Lovely
how
dog.
we shouldn't clone things because then we'll clone humans and it'll be terrible. And it's a way of treating that book, but it's really reductive if what you're only looking for is that particular thing or only one particular thing. Like, I think if I wanted to take Frankenstein as a warning, I wouldn't take it as a warning against scientific um, experimentation. I might take it as a warning about the thing that we're talking about, which is how to understand who has rights and why they have rights and who is human and what makes people human.
Hmm.
That, or at least an examination or an impetus to examine those things, I think. And so that's what, and maybe that just is like I'm, older than 18 now, obviously. Um, and so I come to it with a worldview that's obviously different, but yeah. But I think, if I'm thinking about The Handmaid's Tale or um, even any of these books that we're talking about, less Wuthering Heights maybe, but um, it is that question, right? Who gets to do what, and why do they get to do it, and what role does common decency play in how we treat people, and what role does a sort of institutional call to decency play? And who gets to say? Like, who is the person who controls that particular narrative of human life? Or
Yeah.
what's the institution that does that?
Yeah. True. Um. So yeah, just I suppose harking back, someone said to me, "Why Gothic fiction? Why do you see Gothic fiction as a sort of a possibly a template for lawmaking in this area or law reform?" And I'm thinking, well, if something is, I guess, if it's horrific, it gets your attention. It may
Mm,
get your sympathy, may evoke sympathy. It focuses the mind. Um, And I'm guessing fiction, it could be tied to revolution and to sparking social change. Because if you say, look, behold, look what's happening here. You know, who do we monsterize apart from adoptees, but even wider society, who are we demonizing? And what does it say about us? You know, who are we othering? Who are we, mistrusting or seeing as less than human? So it's got the wider implications than just beyond surrogacy law reform. You know.
And the Gothic is nice too because it's one removed from reality, so it's easier to accept. Like you don't have to, if I'm faced over and over again with the news, like
Mm,
as one is, the news is harder because it's here happening now in real time with people I recognize in real ways that almost that are almost too real. If you can move it into like castles and princesses and really weird magical ghosties who knock on your window or institutions where cloning happens and then the people are taken apart, that it seems to be easier because it's easier to have the ideas because of the removal. Like there's just one step away from what you actually have to experience. You can it's almost easier to think about in that way.
yeah, yeah, it's more palatable or digestible for people that don't really think, oh, I'm watching a great story. And then you hope that the voice at the back of their head might say, yeah, but, you know,
Yeah.
that this could be happening elsewhere. Oh, and if they spot the injustice in something, rather than, they'll soon get fed up if I'm out on, on a soapbox and saying, look how,
Mhm.
how wrong this is. But if it's, parceled up nicely as a sort of here's a great story,
Well,
behold,
everybody loves
Elf.
a story. Yeah. And
Yeah,
everybody loves a story.
yeah.
There's no need not to narrativize. But even the law is a narrative. It's just kind of a dry one.
It is. It is. Well, it suppose depends on the topic. Trying to win people over. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but the case law in this case law on surrogacy, there are horror stories. Older cases on adoption, of no contact orders, of siblings being separated. I warn people if they're getting, a child law lecture, it's going to veer into child protection. And, it usually comes with a bit of a warning, because you can be sure there will be people in your class who've been adopted or who've been through the system, who maybe are care leavers and stuff. So I think
Mm.
increasingly we have to give the trigger warning. And, yourself, someone will come up at the end and say, that resonated, or here's my story. Or even more heartbreakingly, they might say, God, yeah, I have family. I have sisters, brothers somewhere. I'm not allowed to see them. They're only little. What can I do? And you have to think, well, I'm ashamed to say the law isn't always the most helpful. It's more concerned with building the walls and putting out vetoes and hiding things. And how many fires did orphanages succumb to? The number of people that say, I have records and I had records, but the convent burnt down. I mean, the world that's global warming right there. That's where it came from, was all the
All
the
all the
various
records burning.
all the paperwork, all burnt, all gone on a fire. How handy. Pardon me for being cynical. I'm sure some probably did go up and fight. Yeah. Oh, whoops. So it's a wonder where I'm cynical and grumpy. Don't If I hear one more, I went up and lost in a fire. No, it didn't. So
Yeah, and
these.
what's coming is all of those records were lost in a computer malfunction. That's the one that's coming.
Oh God, yes, that's the next. That'll be the next one. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
yeah. So,
All we can do is keep poking at them and say, be careful. If you can preserve title deeds, if you can preserve cases, you know,
yeah, yeah, save that
uh,
paperwork that shows you're a thing. That was
exactly.
traded.
Keep
That was
keep the
traded.
receipts. Always keep the receipts. That's what
But
we
you
tell
know,
them.
I sometimes I wonder though in to what degree all of it, like all of family production, is somehow enters the civic world as a commodification. So,
Mm.
for instance, even a birth certificate. Darby, sorry.
Darby agrees. He
Yeah. there's somebody I built a little free library for my front yard, and so every time somebody wants to check
Oh,
on a book, he goes to the door and barks at them.
that's
I need to put a
good.
note on it that says, "My dog's harmless, he just likes to make noise at you."
Oh, he's the
Um,
librarian. He's the
he is,
custodian.
he's like the malignant spirit.
He is.
Anyway, so yes, we should probably wind up.
Emily,
I
thank
know.
you so much. It's been a
Oh,
really good chat. It's been good crack, as they say here, and we've we've all, I
it's
know they don't say that over there. Different meanings,
no,
but
crack has a very different meaning
very
here.
different meaning. Here it's a good thing generally. But yeah, we'll get the world put to rights at some stage. We'll keep on trying to get people to somehow listen, you know.
Yeah, but, it's better than it was.
Yeah.
I know my entire enormous, ginormous birth family. I got that, um, despite and around and because. And my older brother also. So there have been changes that have facilitated at least some knowledge of some families. I think the harder cases are going to be coming out of transnational adoption, where the
Yes.
record keeping is different and the obscuration is more profound. Um, but hopefully, yeah, I don't know, maybe
It's
there will be
slow
some correction.
progress. I mean, I
Mhm.
know there's talk of they're working on new protocols for international surrogacy. There's some debate over whether domestic adoptions should be tied in with those, but it's a very, very slow progress. There's an acknowledgement of that limping parentage can be harmful, and that term itself is flawed.
I've never
Limping
even heard that term. What is
Yeah,
limping?
limping parentage, the delay in being classed as someone's child if you've been conceived abroad, born of a surrogate. I don't think it's a perfect term. It does make me think, though, of this sort of shuffling creature. So maybe it's not totally inappropriate, but I don't know. They could. How else do you describe the delay in belonging to someone, the delay in being afforded legal parentage, if the genetics and the legalities don't align and don't match? It's
Civic kinship, like,
complicated.
yeah, the I was reading at the beginning of COVID about surrogate mothers who were stuck in places they
Mhm.
couldn't go anywhere to deliver their children to the surrogating parents. I don't know what to
Yeah.
call those.
Commissioning?
And
The
commissioning
commissioning?
parents, yeah. And so they were stuck with children that they never meant to raise. Now for I don't know how long, maybe most of them have been, but they couldn't. There was no nationality for these children. There was no family for these. I mean, and
Yeah.
that's the thing I think the law has to address. Like, what is the legal status of, um, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's horrific. Stateless children, children left in orphanages,
And of course,
what?
here we had a shift in laws. Kim Park Nelson was talking about this. Kim and Eliana
Mm,
Kim have been talking about this for a while. We had a shift in laws. That meant there were a lot of Korean children brought into the U.S. and then their citizenship was not processed correctly, and so they've been being deported back to
yeah.
Korea, where they never, like, they have nothing in Korea,
Yeah.
and that's a serious problem. So stateless children, stateless adoptees, stateless, potentially stateless children. That's a big
Yeah.
one
It
when the
is.
state is still supreme.
Yeah. It's the horrific. The horrific is alive and well, unfortunately, and that's
And
shameful.
crawling,
Shameful. You'd be ashamed
crawling
to be a
across
lawyer
the
sometimes.
ice. Oh, yeah.
I
Somebody's
might
got to
go.
support all this to find things.
So we're out of time. So I've got Emily, thank you for taking part.
For
Thank you so
inviting me. This
much.
was so
Very
much fun.
grateful.
I could talk to you forever.